Coming up on Omnivore, research funding challenges in the food sciences, what's ahead for F&B mergers and acquisitions, and a food safety forecast for 2025. It's all ahead on episode 52 of Omnivore, from the editors of Food Technology Magazine and the Institute of Food Technologists.
This episode of Omnivore is brought to you by IFT membership. Connect with our diverse community and discover a world of new opportunities. Explore the benefits of membership at ift.org/membership.
Welcome to Omnivore from IFT and Food Technology, where we explore the intersection of business, science, and technology in the global food system. I'm Bill McDowell. Agrifood contributes significantly to the U.S. economy. Yet investment in agri-food R&D, both public and private, remains strikingly low. As a percentage of GDP, agri-food investment is just 4.2%, with food-specific R&D at only 1%. What's it like to secure funding in this challenging landscape, and how can it improve? Food Technology's Kelly Hensel spoke with Matthew Moore, Associate Professor at UMass Amherst, about his strategies for funding and his optimism for the future of agri-food research.
So I'm going to start out by talking a little bit about, just delving into the research that you do at the University of Massachusetts Amherst, and how do you go about acquiring funding? What are your steps?
Yeah, so our field is sort of focused on food safety and applied environmental virology. Traditionally for my PhD, I did a lot of research on norovirus, and for the most part, our lab at UMass has sort of continued that area. You can kind of break our lab in terms of norovirus into multiple different areas within, controlling noroviruses, because they present so many challenges, as do a lot of the foodborne pathogens. And so we have sort of one area that we're hoping to expand a little bit into NIH and NSF more with in the coming years, related to fundamental viral pathogenesis and the influence of the microbiome on viral infection, as well as coming up with newer animal models for norovirus. And then we have a lot of projects that are ongoing that traditionally we've gotten, had more success with funding related to concentration and detection of these viruses from the environment. So it's kind of broad. And I think a lot of just food science in general, you have to kind of, even though you have a sub area, some areas within food safety, foodborne viruses, you can't really narrow into just one very specific focus. You do have to be more applied, I guess, and be able to try and come at, challenges in this case with food safety more globally and understand it on a more systemic level than you might if you were in a more focused fundamental area where you're just looking at like one sort of protein cascade or something like that in a cell that regulates, cancer or something like that. And going about funding is always, it's been a challenge, and a lot of it is leaning on your mentors who you did your PhD with. And obviously you learn from other professors that they collaborate with as well. And then I also had really amazing mentors at CDC when I did my postdoc there. So some of it is just learning by example. Obviously, it'll depend on different people's mentorship styles as to how active they are in like getting you grant writing experience. One of the things that I do as a mentor that Leanne was really good with me was identifying, and checking in occasionally with your mentees in terms of their career interests. So the ones that are, want to go into academia, I kind of have like this. I kind of have a flag in my head, like, oh, I want to try and get these folks experience, especially with grant writing as well as teaching experience can be very difficult. There's also other training and mentorship opportunities that I had as a young professor. A lot of it's just learning by example. In terms of one of the other challenges is knowing where to get funding. And that's always kind of like there's a lot of sort of programs out there, especially once you get outside the traditional routes of public funding, and being able to identify those. It's something that I'm still trying to improve on. Like, to be quite honest, most of my funding has come from public sources, primarily the USDA. And so for me, there's always kind of that, the steady traditional, like every year try and put in money for foundational and applied science program for USDA, because we always have a lot of great ideas and trying to get funding for students. But it is extremely competitive. Like, it's very difficult to get. So you constantly apply for it, but it's not as, you're not really going to get a lot of those every year. So
Yeah.
so you have to kind of apply a lot.
Academics need to excel in the subject they're teaching, but you also need to be knowledgeable and skilled at how you go about acquiring this funding. And it sounds like, learning through your mentoring experience, and then sharing that to your students is kind of the pathway. What other skills are needed in order to search out funding or needed to succeed in your research?
Yeah, it's extremely, like, that's one of the key things for like a traditional tenure track research teaching position, is being able to apply for and acquire funding. And I think it's individually, there's like that, like we just discussed, like mentors specifically trying to get students involved in grant writing. Another thing, though, is a lot of departments as well, just as part of their PhD program, can have a structure where they actually make students write like a grant. So at UMass, as well as when I was at NC State, your comprehensive or your PhD qualifying exam in part was writing a grant about a new topic and then proposing it to your committee, where you get feedback as well, structurally built into getting a PhD, because it is such an important skill. And then some of it's just peer, like if you actually do land a faculty position, it's getting supported by your peers and just other mentors who are more senior than you, which I was really fortunate to have, at UMass, a lot of really great fellow faculty who are supportive, and provided me like example grants, example forms, some advice, because it can, even though when you think you're prepared getting into it, it's a pretty big undertaking to apply for these grants.
So not only are there different avenues for like the different types of sciences or what types of research that you're doing, but there's also different avenues for funding in terms of like you said, USDA, whether it's private or public or, partnership models. There's different foundations out there, philanthropic organizations. I mean, it's got to be time consuming to delve into kind of what those opportunities are. Can you talk about like what are the if you know, and what are the pros and cons of kind of each different type of funding?
It's extremely diverse. Even within one individual agency like the USDA, there's many different types of grants. Like there's educational grants to equipment grants to the traditional sort of research standard grants that I was sort of mentioning in the beginning. And then there's integrated grants as well that involve an extension component, which is crazy. And that's all within just one potential RFA, one from the USDA for the foundational and applied. And then the USDA also has like these larger multi-institutional grants, like the Sustainable Agricultural Systems Grant. It can be really overwhelming. And I think that's one of the big things when, especially even now as a faculty, still trying to understand and grasp all of the potential opportunities, can be really challenging. I would have to say I don't have as much experience with private-public partnerships, as well as sort of the philanthropic organizations. I haven't traditionally had as much funding from them. I've been primarily funded by public organizations, but even within public, like you have the federal, like USDA, NSF, NIH, but then you also can have state level. In terms of the positives and negatives, I would say from public, like especially I've been lucky, I guess, the public grants that I've gotten, there's not really many negatives. I wish there was more money for USDA that was maybe on a scale like NIH has, especially given like the amazing work that they fund, and then the fact that there's not as much money to go around to begin with to fund all this work that I would put right on par with whatever the NIH and NSF is funding.
Obviously, one of the main points of the article being that there's just not enough funding. There's just not enough money out there for the impact that food and agriculture has. But I know that you were quoted as saying in the article that you were relatively optimistic. And I love that funding will increase. What makes you optimistic?
At the end of the day, like, food is extremely important. And I think there is a growing recognition of how important it is. And I think at a certain point, something's going to give where a light bulb kind of collectively goes off, not just in our public agencies, but more broadly in our society, of not only is food important, but how do we actually address the fundamental issues that we have with creating healthy, safe, sustainable foods going forward. And also just from a functional standpoint, economically, it benefits us to really delve into and double down our food systems, because we not only have first-class, research going on in food and food science, but we also have a first-class food system. And so you really want to lean into your strength. And I think that there's going to be a light bulb that eventually goes off. I don't know when the light bulb is coming, but there will eventually be a light bulb that goes off where we go, oh, we're really good at this. We can really transform the landscape of food, not just for our country, but for our species going forward. And so I think that's why I kind of have the optimism. In the near term, I think it's extremely challenging because there's just so many good food safety, food science researchers out there. It's just, and there's not as much money to go around, unfortunately. But I do think going forward globally, we're going to start understanding, I think, as a country, what our strength is and start putting money towards it accordingly.
Matthew Moore, Associate Professor of Food Science at the University of Massachusetts Amherst and recipient of IFT's 2024 Outstanding Young Scientist Award, researches food safety microbiology with a focus on foodborne viruses. Learn more about the state of agri-food research funding and the different avenues scientists pursue to get research projects funded in the December-January issue of Food Technology. We'll be back with more Omnivore in a moment, but first, this word from our sponsor.
IFT is the convener of the global food system. As a member, you'll cultivate your professional network within our global community, stimulate new ideas with the latest research and trends, and accelerate your growth with expert training and resources. Why wait? Visit ift.org/membership to join IFT today.
Welcome back to Omnivore. I'm Bill McDowell. Jeff Grogg, founder and managing director of JPG Resources and the former head of R&D at Kashi, brings a unique perspective to the challenges and opportunities in the food industry. As a co-founder of an early-stage venture capital firm, he's closely attuned to the forces shaping the market. In a conversation with Food Technology's Mary Ellen Kuhn, he explores how 2025's M&A activity will be shaped by consumer demands for affordability, authenticity, and innovation, along with the strategic opportunities and challenges these trends present for both brands and investors alike.
Jeff, thanks for being here today. You're bullish on the merger and acquisition market right now, I think, and a number of food and beverage companies are signaling their openness to an acquisition. So take us through what we should expect to see this year.
Yes, thanks, Mary Ellen. I appreciate you having me on. We've seen just a lot more movement over the last 6 months, and we see it ramping up going forward. For one, the PE side, there's still money there that's available to be deployed, and I think there's growing interest on the sell side to do transactions and maybe a rationalization of what the right price is between the two. So we see that happening, and then we've seen some big acquisitions already on the corporate side, and we're starting to see more divestitures. So we do expect at all levels in the industry for M&A activity to continue to trend upward.
Well, I think that you expect to see some additional activity with some of the major brands refocusing and maybe selling off some of their units. Tell us a little bit about that.
We do. Back to this summer when we were on the panel at IFT, one of the other panelists and I both said, we expect to see increased acquisition and divestiture. And, I think it's just, again, the normalization of the market a little bit. It's been very choppy. There's been a lot of instability in the markets. And I think now as companies are refocusing, they want to expand certain parts of the portfolio and shed others and just get a little leaner and more focused. And that leads to spin outs as well as acquisitions.
Well, are there any segments of the market that you expect to see the most activity in?
Yeah, one of the biggest trends in food continues to be protein. Americans can't get enough protein. And so, we continue to see those brands be strong and to see companies want to have a piece of that in their portfolio. In beverage, certainly there continues to be interesting growth brands. That's always, kind of an evergreen market where there's brands that emerge to scale. And, tied in with that, I think there's a lot of interest in lower sugar. You're seeing the lower sugar beverages pop. You're seeing that across other categories. I would say there's an element of Hershey and Mars and others broadening into salty snacks as a little bit of a hedge against the sugar-based portfolio even. So I do think, sugar being the nemesis and protein being the angelic portion of the portfolio, those we'll continue to see decisions made based on shaping categories around those items.
Well, having covered the food industry for a long time, it's interesting to see those cycles. So what's demonized? So do you think the whole sugar reduction trend has some legs and that will continue?
I think it does, but we're seeing, every trend produces a counter trend at some point. And of course, there's more and more pushback now on all the sugar alternatives. And I think rightly so in a lot of cases. The physiological effect of sweetness, regardless of the caloric content, is pretty well known now. And it is confusing to the body, and your body sometimes reacts in ways based on what happens in the mouth instead of the rest of the system. And we don't fully understand that, but I think that there's, to be healthier, really reducing sweetness is an element that I think we'll continue to see some focus on, and not just reducing sugar. So yeah, I don't see sugar coming back around to being a desirable nutrient in the near term. But also, I think there's going to be more and more focus on how this sugar reduction gets done. And is sugar reduction enough, or should we be more focused on dialing back the sweetness overall?
Well, that's really, really some interesting points that you've made. Seems like health will continue to be a big driver then.
Yeah, I expect, health is always a big driver. There's always opportunity. There's always new news. Nutrition, as much as we like to think that there's, tried and true, if you just look back in the last 20 or 30 years, there's been lots of zigs and zags in terms of what we consider healthy. And that is going to continue to evolve. And I think, honestly, we need the nutrition thought process to be more personalized. What you need and what I need and what 10 other people in any given room need are very different. And we've not looked at it that way historically. So I think as the industry continues to evolve to a better understanding of personalized nutrition, that will continue to drive change as well.
Well, let's go back to the M&A topic a little bit. Or I wanted to ask you about startups. A couple of years ago, it seemed like venture capital firms were really practically throwing money at startups. That's really changed. So what's the outlook for startups, and what do startups need to do to really be positioned to be appealing to attracting capital?
Yes, that's a great question. And we talk about this a lot in the industry because it has shifted. The dynamic has moved a lot in a hurry. It was growth, growth, growth. Tell me about how you make money later. But right now, I want to see you doubling, tripling every year. And, most investors have moved to a little bit more of a position of show me that you can be profitable, show me your margins, and being more focused on business fundamentals, which ultimately is a healthy thing. But it certainly makes the road for founders and startups a little bit more rocky. And, with the uncertainty in the stock market and so forth, individual, high net worth individuals or angels have also, clutched their wallets quite a bit. So that early stage funding, when a brand, really struggles to find profit in the first few $1 million of revenue, that has been very tough. And I think is going to continue to be a little tough because, those early stage investors are hearing what the more professional investors and the firms want. And yet it's almost impossible to be profitable at, $2 million revenue. So there's got to be, again, some rationalization there. I think we'll see a little bit more of early stage investors saying, well, I don't necessarily need to see profit, but I need to see a responsibly run company that has good margins and that can generate velocities. And don't tell me every day about how many doors you're opening. That's an expense. tell me about how you're selling more through the channels you already are living in.
Well, I did want to ask you about the presidential election and if you think that's going to have any impact on the merger and acquisition scene.
I think it will have some. I mean, for the smaller portions of the market, the vast majority of transactions are well below where the FTC is going to step in and take an active stance. But certainly at the larger end, we've gone from a very active administration to one that is presumably going to be less active, and that will potentially lead to more large acquisitions or mergers happening. So we don't know how that's going to play out yet, but I think that's the assumption, is that it'll be easier for bigger companies to make deals happen. But again, for the vast majority of folks in the industry and for the private equity groups and so forth, most of that happens below that line anyway of FTC attentiveness. So I'm not so sure it's going to have a big impact on, the majority of transactions that get done.
Thanks for taking us through that, and thanks for your perspective today.
Sure, absolutely. It was a pleasure.
Jeff Grogg is the founder and managing director of JPG Resources and former R&D lead at the Kashi Company. He's among several experts who shared their thoughts on the 2025 outlook for consumer behavior in the December-January issue of Food Technology. Last fall's wave of high-profile food recalls, from salmon and frozen waffles to deli meat and raw onions, highlighted ongoing challenges with foodborne pathogens like E. coli and Listeria. At the same time, state bans on several food additives, including red dye number 3 and potassium bromate, spurred new debates about ingredient safety and led the FDA to revoke regulatory approval for brominated vegetable oil. Food Technology's Julie Larson-Brisher spoke with Willette Crawford, principal consultant at Katalyst Consulting, about whether these issues will remain at the forefront in 2025 and how emerging advancements in food science could help the industry respond.
Well, hi, Willette. I'm really excited to talk to you today about what's exciting in the world of food safety.
Thank you, Julie. Really glad to be here with you. There's a lot going on in the world of food safety. And as you know, we've had a lot of outbreaks and recalls, so there's never a dull moment to discuss.
Well, exactly. And that's exactly what I want to discuss with you today. It's 2024, pretty active year for food safety and public health officials with so many far-reaching recalls, multiple recalls in certain categories due to pathogen contamination. So were these events, in your opinion, like setbacks in the confidence in the food safety system in general? Or is it just that outbreaks or even chemical hazard reporting, it's just better now? And so we're hearing more about it. Or is there really some underlying reason behind this cluster of food recalls?
That's a really critical question and a nuanced one. The events of 2024 have certainly made a visible impact on public perception of the food supply. And it's understandable why folks are taking greater interest and are expressing concern. As you mentioned, with all the large multi-state recalls involving everyday items like deli meats and produce and even frozen waffles, that can do a lot to shake consumer trust. And so people really rely on the food system to provide products that are safe and wholesome. And so anytime they find information to the contrary, it's really concerning for them and kind of shakes consumer confidence. Add to that the spotlight on controversial food additives and state level regulations and bans on substances that were previously deemed as safe or generally recognized as safe, GRAS. It really just adds to the level of concern consumers feel, as well as the confusion they feel, because things that were once determined to be appropriate for them are now being advertised as a health concern. So while I believe these events, can cause some setback in consumer confidence, I think it underscores a significant evolution in our progress for food safety. Outbreak and hazard reporting systems have improved. We know that we have more sophisticated tools in genomics like whole genome sequencing, which helps us to identify and pinpoint foods more quickly in foodborne illness outbreaks and recalls. We know that we have improved detection systems as well as traceability for foods. So all of these things help us in identifying the problems more readily. So it's really a combination between improving our technologies and our techniques, as well as the evolution of foodborne pathogens and how they continue to be able to evade our systems and being consistent in that.
Yeah. What I'm wondering, if you had like a crystal ball, what do you think might be the emerging food hazards that food system players will need to keep their eyes on in 2025?
I think with so many different emerging technologies, as well as novel food sources, alternative proteins, things of that sort, there are going to be a lot of challenges that we haven't faced. We're going to have to learn how to modify some of our existing food safety tools and our food safety management systems to address these things. But I would say ongoing challenge, one of the things I find that I don't think we're talking about enough from the food safety perspective is the impact of climate change. I think climate change is dramatically changing the way in which these pathogens behave and their persistence and survival in the environment, as well as our ability to mitigate them using food technologies that we've been accustomed to. Again, I mentioned, novel proteins. Those are things that are helping us find ways to feed the food supply or find ways to feed the growing population. But they also come with some unknown risk, and they come with some things that we still need to further develop and need to further study. And then lastly, I think technology, while it's great and it's helping us with predictive analytics and it's helping us with traceability, it's also presenting a concern about a vulnerability when it comes to cybersecurity. The quality of the information and the integrity of the information that we put into all of these systems and how they might be manipulated for other purposes.
Let me go back to the first thing you were talking about, climate change, because we don't talk about that a lot in food safety circles up to now. So I find it really interesting that you're mentioning it here as an emerging, potential food safety hazard that we have to manage the risk for. Mm-hmm. Can you give me an example? Does it go beyond, say, seasonal? You know how salmonella has like seasons, right? For example, in a poultry plant. Can you give me an example of something we might face with climate change and food safety that we haven't thought about?
So, I think about all of the extreme weather events that climate change brings about. And, each of those can increase the possibility for contamination within the food supply. Floodwaters can introduce pathogens that we're concerned about. Drought conditions can even influence the survivability of those pathogens and the spread of those pathogens, or even concentrate heavy metals in soil and water. And so, again, it's not something that we have started to talk about enough in food safety, but climate change certainly impacts the hazards that we're concerned about and the probability of how likely they are to occur. I just find it that while we talk about climate change from the standpoint of sustainability, oftentimes we don't really think about the impact from a food safety standpoint. So I think things like the new strains of E. coli or strains of E. coli that we're not typically accustomed to seeing in certain products, I think it's playing out in those ways where we're seeing different pathogen food associations and pathogen food interactions that we're not accustomed to. But because of those changing conditions and the bug's ability to adapt to those changing conditions, we're starting to have some uncommon food associations.
Right, yeah. Well, what do you think if you had 3 top measures or initiatives that you could recommend that the food industry look at utilizing or leveraging to solve food safety problems, what would they be?
I think enhancing food safety training. We talk about all of this technology that we have at our disposal right now, but how much of it do we really use to enhance training? Training is critical in food safety. FSMA places extra expectations and importance on training, when it comes to making sure that people not only understand what they're supposed to be doing, but the impact they have to the safety of the product. But I think we really need to leverage things like virtual reality, where we can help to increase our skill sets, where we can help people work through real world problems, but in a situation that doesn't have those real world consequences. So that's one of the things that I would like to see.
Yeah, that sounds cool. I want those for Christmas.
Yeah, I do too.
Well, it has been a pleasure, as always, talking with you today, Willette. And I appreciate you and sharing these insights with us today.
Well, thank you so much. It's a pleasure likewise. And it's always wonderful to discuss food safety and how we move forward in protecting public health.
Willette Crawford is principal consultant and owner of Katalyst Consulting, LLC, which provides food safety and regulatory compliance support to food and agriculture companies. While serving as a consumer safety officer at the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, she led the agency's first environmental assessment to investigate the E. coli 0145 outbreak associated with romaine lettuce.
Thank you to this episode's sponsor, IFT Membership. Satiate your hunger for knowledge, connection, and career growth with an IFT membership. Discover the benefits and activate yours at ift.org/membership.
And that wraps up this episode of Omnivore. Thanks again to all our guests and my colleagues at Food Technology. Omnivore is produced and distributed by the Institute of Food Technologists. If you enjoyed today's show and want to learn more about Food Technology Magazine or how to join the conversation by becoming an IFT member, visit ift.org/membership. For more in-depth discussion about innovation in the science of food, check out IFT's other podcast, Side Dish, on the News and Publications page of ift.org. If you have comments or suggestions for future shows, just send us an email. The address is editors@ift.org. For the entire team at Food Technology and IFT, I'm Bill McDowell. Thanks for listening, and join us again for our next episode.